Live. All right, I think I am live. Well, welcome back. I'm still having trouble trying to get the stream working the way that I want. Hopefully, I'm kind of getting closer to where I need to be. I was hoping that this software I was using, I think Streamlabs OBS, would kind of do the things I would want it to do. I did the start stream there inside of that, but I think I needed to do one more step in YouTube itself. So hopefully everything is working as intended now. All right. So, okay, so what I'm doing now, I was working on some stuff for quite a bit, talking to myself apparently. I was wondering if anybody was even watching this, but we'll see. This is all a learning experience for me. So essentially what I'm trying to do is finish up this mixed reality service configuration pull request that I've been working on. And what I had done was I was actually explaining a lot of the changes I had made, and essentially kind of going through all of the classes that I had been working on. I can go back and do that again just because I think that it's important for people to kind of see a lot of the changes and have me explain kind of what's going on here, especially for like Dino or Simon or some of the other people that are interested in using the toolkit and understanding the breaking changes that are coming along. So what I had done was we were using this old class called a service configure, or just a configuration really, and it wasn't really generic. And we've been using a lot of generics and a lot of patterns in the toolkit already to kind of help reduce the amount of duplicate code and the complexity as well. A lot of times complexity will decrease when you are able to iterate over a collection a single time instead of having to do collections of types that are just like one-off types. And I'd noticed we had a bunch of one-off types for our different configurations. So I actually was able to reduce the amount of code in the toolkit by quite a bit. Let's see, I removed 1,200 lines and I added about 700. So I roughly removed half of the lines that we had, which is just pretty good. I think that's very admirable. And I think in the process made things a lot easier to understand and comprehend. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through class by class and kind of do my own review and like how I kind of approach pull request reviews and things like that. I'm not so worried about the tests here. I do want to just kind of point out some of the key changes in this pull request that was quite important for what we were doing. So let me just get through these tests real quick. I'm just going to close these out. So one of the important things I had to do was kind of refactor how we're doing our implement attribute. We had written this some time back to essentially help define the types of concrete classes that the mixed reality toolkit will run. Now to maybe for some of you that don't understand how the toolkit works, essentially what we have is a list of services, iMixed reality services. These services are the basis of everything that can be registered and run within the mixed reality toolkit. And we can actually take a look at that. So iMixed reality service. This is the base interface that essentially defines all of the services that can run. Services can be anything from data providers to, and there's really just the two flavors, to systems as well. Now, the difference between a data provider, a system, and a service, well, a service is kind of a general term that is the base for all of these things, but it's really just the base general type. From these services, you can get these more specialized types of services like the data provider. Now, a data provider is essentially Let's see, let's go to the actual interface here. The data provider is essentially a more specific type. And this is really just the types that will be essentially adapters that wrap around the native libraries that are pulling information from the lowest levels of the platform systems up into services which are more platform agnostic. So that's maybe a more specific type here that we want to just make sure we understand here. And then on top of that, we have these services. So iSystem, I believe, iMixed Reality Event System. So the next level up is this iMixed Reality Event System. So essentially, it is a service that implements an event system and has these and can actually send events to game objects that have registered themselves as a listener. Everything in the UX layer will use this. Any game object that needs to receive an event from the service provider or from any of these systems that we are using will eventually get these. So right now at the moment, I believe that we have the input system is using this and a couple of the other systems as well. The spatial observers are using this. And essentially uses the messaging system that's built into Unity to send these events out. So let's see here. I believe those are really the basic types here. So as we register systems and services here within this, we could add one here. Essentially what this does is anything that implements the iMixed Reality service will show up here. In any of these lists. And as part of the pull request that I've been working on, I actually went and made these lists a lot more generic. So part of that is I had to go in and kind of make these a little bit better. It looks like I just cleaned up this implements attribute class a little bit more. What I did was make sure that we got rid of this. We weren't using it. And then I cleaned this up. Now, because we're only using this in the editor, I don't mind using link. Typically for runtime classes, I try to not rely on link very often. But because it's an editor class, I'm not really too worried about performance, so it doesn't really bother me so much here that we have that in here. So just for the sake of removing 10 lines of code here, 15 lines of code, we could use one line. So I felt like that was a little bit of a win there. So let's see, I added this abstract class for the base mixed reality extension data provider. These are all of the profiles that you can register within this very additional service providers list here. So I did have to still create these one-off classes, and really a lot of this is somewhat more like boilerplate, which is not ideal. And eventually we do want to try and get away from some of these things, but I do want to provide as much ease of use for software developers so they don't have to go back and recreate some of these classes and things. Let's see here. Extension data provider. I don't even know if this needs to be a data provider. This should probably be a service, iMixed Reality service. We'll come back to this. I don't know what I want to do with this yet. Let's see here. So I'm just going to close a few of these meta file changes. Let's see, base mixed reality extension service profile. So we got rid of this class altogether and replaced it with that abstract class that will be implemented from other people. Let's see here. So one of the other things too is we definitely did a heavy refactor on this base mixed reality profile. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and hide the comments so that we can just do a pull review without too much here. All I did here is renamed this field twice to is editable. I think that made a lot more sense in the grand scheme of things on like what we were doing as far as what was going on here. And then I made sure to add a property to get and set this as well. Let's see here. And then let's see, so base mixed reality service profile. This also seems to be abstract. So what this was is to make sure that any services we have will likely derive from this. Now the important thing here is that we have a collection of registered service providers, and this is a generic type. This T service, this is essentially, this T service needs to be the service that is going to be what the profile implements. So if we go back here in this list, if I add a new instance type, anything that shows up in this dropdown, that's going to be the type that will show up inside of this dropdown. So right now, if you do this, you can see that right now we have two the Windows and Lumen mixed reality spatial mesh observers. Now this is a constraint so that we can limit what shows up in this list, and essentially that's what shows up there. I think I want to go ahead and add some documentation around this a little bit more, just to help define exactly like what's going on here. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and close these other classes out that we weren't using. So we have this here, this iMixed Reality service configuration. So this is actually what does the constraint on this. So let me go ahead and add that here for this documentation. Let's see here, iMixed Reality service that will show in the iMixed, let's see, iMixed Reality profile? No, I think this is actually a type. The profile type is an important thing. I want to say it's the instance type. Define the, I believe that, I'm just going to keep this out for now. I don't know if that's actually where I want to put this documentation yet. Let's go ahead and go to the implementation of this. I believe I did it here. It's going to be this instance type that is going to be constrained to this type that we're going to be doing here. I think that's actually the right place. The interesting thing here is how we end up doing this in the inspector. So what I ended up doing for this, let's see if I can find the inspector for this. So we have is a valid configuration, profile tests. Here's the profile. Let's just check this guy out real quick. So the base mixed reality service profile. I think that it's here that service is more important. Yeah, so we are using this in a way. Let's see here. So I do want to add more documentation to this because this seems to be quite important here. So this is the base service profile. I'm sorry, the base profile type to derive all services from. This is the constraint type to constrain all of the valid configuration instance types too. Only valid, I'm sorry, only, let's see. I'm trying to think about how to word this exactly. So, the service type to constrain all of the valid configuration instant types too. Only types that implement the only types that implement the T service will show up in the inspector dropdown for the instanced type. I believe I need to add this too. All right, so this seems a lot more clear. All right, so I'll go ahead and add this documentation as well because that seems important. So one of the changes I made here is now we have this collection of mixed reality configurations that have a service type that they can be defined essentially, and that's how a lot of these constraints show up essentially. So now, let's see here. Looks like fork updated again. Search diff and commits, improve some stuff. Cool. I'm gonna wait for fork to restart, I guess. I'm gonna go ahead and add more of this documentation stuff that we added here. This will be important later on. In the service configuration dropdown. All right. So we'll just give this a second. Might be slow just because I'm streaming. I don't really have the best internet at my house, unfortunately. Or the best machine to be doing the streaming from. But hey, you know, it's his life. Okay, cool. Just go ahead and check the notifications while we're waiting for that to update, I suppose. Looks like Unity's been doing a bunch of stuff to their input system. I think mainly they're just closing out issues that they're no longer interested in, or they've already fixed. All right. We'll just head back to our pull request here. And we'll go back to do the rest of our review. All right. So there's just the submodule changes. I'm going to go ahead and collapse all of this as much as possible. I believe that was everything. And we'll head back up to where we were at. I believe we were in, let's see here. This is the inspector. Not too worried about that yet. I believe we were here in the configuration profile now. Closer. Those are important ones that I want to, oh, here we go. It was this one here. We added this just now. Okay. So that should help clarify some things quite a bit. So essentially what this does is, and this is all running in the editor. Let's see here. So when we get it, if it's null, we create a new array. And then we have our service configurations, which we check the length, and then we create a new array for the configurations based on the generic type that we've defined. And then we loop through all of those, and we create the generic type based on the cached configuration options, which includes all of these here. All right, and when we set it, essentially we do the same thing, but in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's see here. We did a lot of refactoring for most of our provider profiles. So a lot of the profiles are now empty, where they're just this boilerplate, essentially, where we define the profile. And before, where we were doing all the registered service providers, that is now all inside of the base service provider, the base mixed reality service profile. So anything where we had any array or collection or of the data providers now is more generalized, and it's now in that base abstract class that we've defined. And you'll see a lot of this where we've just removed most of that code. And we also removed a lot of the configuration classes as well, because now we're using a generic type. Let's see here. So now this is the same thing where we just remove the configuration. Now we will have profiles where essentially what they're going to do is anything where we're doing more specific stuff for that profile, like specific profile configurations for that service, system, or platform specific data provider. We'll see that that's really all we need inside of these profile classes now. So now the classes are more they're more specific to what it is that we're wanting them to do, which is going to be more important later. I mean, essentially, that's what you want to do. You only want to write a class that does a specific thing. You don't really want to write the same code over and over again. Looks like we also got rid of another configuration class, so this is completely gone now. And when we go through this, you'll notice that in this type that we've defined that implements the mixed reality service configuration, you'll see that we have a lot of these formally serialized as fields, and that's really just to make sure that these classes that we've removed are still able to be ingested and serialized and updated to our latest version. So we are trying to keep it as forwards compatible as possible, which is important. You'll notice that even though we aren't really using this implements attribute anymore. I still left the iMixedReality service implement attribute here just in case someone decides that they want to kind of create their own or do their own thing where they have their own profile. That way, at least we're making sure we're only able to register types that implement the iMixedReality service. Same thing here for the name. We changed this to be, we had all these one-off names. Now it's just more specific. So the other thing that I wasn't able to make forwards compatible is the profile that would be registered with this as well. So I think that's also an important change that I wanted to point out as well. Take these headphones off, they're getting kind of sweaty. Give me one moment here. Also, you may hear my desktop speakers now, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. I'm gonna just go and check my messages real quick, guys. Let's see. All right, so Dino over here on the Discord Slack, he was asking, what is the proper way to handle input actions in code? I can't find an iMixedReality input action handler. Jared responded with iMixedReality input handler, which is absolutely true. That's exactly what we want to use. I'm just going to put a thumbs up on that guy real quick. Let's see, I'm actually going to pull this over so you guys can actually see what I'm saying. Let's see here. So input actions, the input handler, now that's the one we want. So Jared, you were right with the iMixedReality input handler there. So essentially that is essentially the catch-all for any and all actions. I believe there is also a way to do a thing where you can actually listen to any and all actions. Raised by the input system. Let's see here. I'm going to come back to that later. I still want to finish up doing our code review for what we're working on currently. Let's see here. I'm just going to check back here, make sure the stream is still going pretty good. And where are we at? Are we at like an hour, 45 minutes or so? Okay. Let's just go ahead and try and finish up what we're doing here, which is this review. So let's see here, the mixed reality service configuration. So I kind of went over this a little bit. I changed this from a struct to being a class because I wanted to implement the interface a little bit more. I was also kind of debating on whether or not I wanted to make this sealed. I decided not to, just because there may be more specific types that people want to use later on. I don't know how that will affect registering services in the future, but let's just keep it open for now. Let's try not to limit what everybody's doing. I think that's an important part of what we're doing with the toolkit, is to make sure we're providing enough functionality to make it customizable, but we don't want to essentially close people off. Okay, so Let's go ahead and continue going through this. So yeah, I added a bunch of these serialized, formally serialized things, changed the names a little bit more, and made it more generic, essentially. Let's see here, mixed reality toolkit configuration profile. This is the main configuration profile, and essentially what I did was I just added an internal setter for the profile, because I think for the other ones I believe that we were able to do this, but we didn't actually define them. So that's not that big of a deal. Let's see, mixed reality network system profile. Again, we just removed the configuration array. I believe we just removed the configuration altogether. With this one, again, we just removed the array and derived from that base profile. Removed the spatial observer configuration class for the generic one. Then we also added these configuration extensions where we were trying to get the configuration name. Let's see here. Whoa. Attempts to get the name of the first configuration. Are we actually using this? I just want to double check. I'm not really sure what this class is for, so. Configuration extensions. Yeah, it doesn't look like we're actually using this. And it attempts to get the configuration by name. I'm going to go ahead and remove this class. I don't really think we're using this, so I'm actually going to just go ahead and remove this altogether. All right. Let's see here. So what we'll do, open containing folder. I'm just going to go ahead and actually delete this altogether. Then head back to Unity, make sure everything compiles. So I believe Jared is giving me some interesting information about specifying target triplets. I'm not sure what this is. Auto conf generated configure scripts can make decisions based on canonical name for the system, the target triplet, which is CPU, kernel, system. Type command line argues configure system type. Not really 100% sure how this relates to our project, but makes sense. Anyway, I'll come back to that later. Let's see here. So I'm just going to keep going here. Did this recompile? It did. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this since we don't, oh, no, I don't want everything. I only want to stage that folder. Move the unused extension. Make sure we go ahead and, oh, it is pushing it all the way up to the server. Great. So we've went ahead and removed that class. We don't need it. I'm not sure why I added this before. If we need it again, it shouldn't be hard to go back through the history and just check it out. So we removed another data model configuration extensions. Not too worried about that. Let's see, base mixed reality profile inspector. So this is where a lot of the magic happens for what we're doing. All right, so this is where a lot of the magic is happening. So base mixed reality profile inspector, we changed the const name for the profile property to is editable. Essentially what this is going to do later just makes it so that we don't have to find the name of this this field over and over again. Let's see here. So we added a setter. So fields should always be private. So we re-encapsulated this profile with a private setter and made sure that the derived classes have access to this property. And then we updated all of those references. We made sure that the references for the profile were updated from is custom profile to is editable. And then here's that property, again, that I was talking about we were going to look for. So with Unity, the property is typically a string. So I just wanted to make it so that we don't have to write this string over and over and over again. And if we decide that we want to change this again later, we can do it in one place. Let's see here. So we did that quite a few places here. So not a whole lot changed there. We just really updated the references to our old field, and we properly encapsulated this profile for that. So it looks like for the other inspectors for each of the other profiles, we just removed all of the things that we were doing before for our custom rendering for the drop downs and all of the things that we were doing to make it so that we could render the lists of our configurations. So now all of that's done in the same place. You'll notice throughout this pull request, a lot of this code is duplicated, and now we've essentially wrapped it all up into using the same code path, which is really important. It really helps maintainability. So you'll notice that a lot of the stuff is exactly the same over and over and over again. The only things that we didn't change is the headers for our help box and our label fields for all of our profiles. And later on, what we want to do is actually move everything from the old inspector layouts to the new UI elements, and that's going to be important for us later as we go through this. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and close this out. It looks like essentially we're going to be doing the same thing here. Let's see, mixed reality controller profiles inspector. Looks like we just updated some things here. What's interesting with this one is it doesn't look like that we it doesn't look like we actually removed the old code that we were using to do this. I'm gonna actually take a look at this class. Yeah, we still have this mapping definition, so I'm not sure why we didn't update it correctly. So I'm actually going to take a look at this class, the mixed reality controller mapping configurations profile inspector. So let's see here. I think this one actually is fine the way it is, because essentially what we're doing, it's this one. So the data providers is the one we updated. But the mapping profiles, they kind of have their own thing going on. We have a list of these, of each of these mapping definitions, and they essentially have their own profiles here. Now, we didn't do the mapping and the controller data providers together for a couple of important reasons. One of them being is that the configuration profile is not for mapping input actions. So we may have to go back through and update this again in the future as well. So what this does is essentially gives us a table that we can define for the mouse and all the inputs there. Same for the Xbox controller. We have all these actions that we can define. And these actions are defined here in the input system action profile. So I'm not too worried about that. So that one is fine. I think we just needed to update the references to this profile because now we're using the internal one. Let's see here. Same here, same here, same here. A lot of these are just updating the references from that. So that should be okay. So here's another one where we just, oh, hold on. Wait, this is the mixed reality network system. So we weren't really doing a whole lot here anyway. So we just started calling on the base profile inspector, mixed reality service profile inspector. I want to say that should actually be a little bit different. So let's take a look at it. Network profile inspector. So I want to say this actually should be doing something a little bit different. Go to the network system profile here. We do this here. Okay, that seems fine. I think that's fine. So I'm actually going to check out the spatial observer profile inspector as well, just to make sure that we are actually doing it this way. We are. Okay, cool. So that looks fine too. I just thought that maybe this was derived from the wrong class, but it looks like it's good. But essentially what we did for the inspectors is we removed all of the extra stuff and we're just calling on the base inspector GUI to render the configuration list essentially. All right, I'm just going to pop back over to the browser to make sure that my stream is still going. It is. Great. Let's see here. So we're most of the way through this pull request, so let's just keep going. Let's see here. This is the new mixed reality service registered service providers profile inspector. This is completely revamped from the old one. And this is a pretty good idea of like what it takes to just implement a new configuration list essentially. All we're doing is rendering the mixed reality toolkit's logo. We added our back button to the parent profile so that we have that breadcrumb, and then a label defining, what is this thing, and then a help box that helps people understand what they're looking at. We check the profile to see if it's editable or not. We update our serialized object. We add a little bit of space. We render our list, added a little bit more space, and then apply our modified properties. Let's see here. So that's essentially all it takes to render one of these list drop-downs now, which is nice. It's a lot more condensed than what it was before. Just looking back, this is one of the old ones where we had, oh no, it's not an old one. This is we've renamed it. It was the Mixed Reality Registered Service Provider Profile Inspector, and now is the Mixed Reality Service Provider Inspector. So this is that base inspector class when we were in the networking system that I was like not sure of whether or not we were supposed to do it. So this is actually where a lot of the magic happens for the new inspector rendering now. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Oh, I think we went too far. This is it, right? Maybe not. I don't see where we're rendering. Interesting. That is very interesting. So we have our spatial awareness profile. You know what this is for? This is for each one of these has their own configuration profile that they can essentially have. And you define those here. And I think that we actually have some here inside of each of the others. Let me see if I can actually find them. There it is. So if I add this to the Lumen one, this should show up here. This is interesting. I don't think we have one, but if I were to go and create spatial observer profile, it should show up here. And then we would want to add it. What's concerning now to me is that we don't have any default ones. So if I were to open this up, it's not showing the correct ones, I believe. No, it does show up. For whatever reason, it's not showing all of the assets here. And I think it's mainly because when you open this dropdown, unlike here when you go to search, if you search something, this only searches in assets. When you could search in packages or Lumen specifically, I think the same problem shows up here in this pop-up window. Unity has not made a way to search through packages. And part of that is because typically for these scriptable objects or any of the other defined like serialized classes, you're not supposed to be able to access those from the packages themselves. You actually want to have those inside of your app. We'll have to go back to that. I'm actually going to, before I continue on, I want to go ahead and open a bug report about that, because that's kind of it's kind of important. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and start right now. All right, so when I was reviewing my pull request for refactoring configuration profiles, I noticed that the spatial observer configuration profiles for each specific platform, for each of the specific platforms we're missing. Let's see here. Went to search for them and could not find them. Likely will need them to auto-register themselves, much like the way we want to do it for the input data providers. To reproduce, really not reproducible steps. We know it's missing, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. Expected versus actual behavior. I'm going to go ahead and remove this too. screenshots, not that important. We're using 30. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just put the commit shell here. 2019. I believe we're using 114F1. And this affects both Windows Mixed Reality and Magic Leap. For the additional context, let's see here. C I'm going to go back to the issues here. I know Simon had opened up something similar to this recently, and I want to make sure default profiles, configuration issues, OpenXR and UPM. So I thought maybe it's already closed. I'm just going to go back through. Well, maybe it's not in here anymore, but I thought we had something similar. I'm sure Simon will have some input on this, but I'll go ahead and assign myself to this because I know I'll probably end up wanting to do that. We'll definitely have it done by 1.0. Shoot, I even want to do it by the time we get to 0.2. Let's go ahead and just go ahead and put this here. And we'll put this into do. All right. So I'll come back to this later. Let's try and finish up what we were working on. So that's somewhat concerning and also kind of frustrating. I thought I had profiles for these already, so maybe I do. I'll try and look for them a little later. But essentially, what we would like to do is actually make it so that we could easily create a profile if we need. That would be great. And then also have it self-assign. So for most of the configurations, we should be already self-assigning. So not too worried there. Just checking my messages real quick. Sorry about that. So we'll come back to this. I know that's going to be something that is going to be important later. Not as important right now, but I do need to make sure those profiles are at least there later on. And they will self-assign themselves in this as well. So that'll be important. Let's see here. So let's go back. So this profile is different. This profile is essentially what gets put into the spatial awareness's configuration profile and is the base one. So it's likely what will show on all of those. We probably also need to add more of these. I'll come back to these. I definitely need to update a lot of the services. But really right now what I want to do is make sure we get the configurations set up and done and ready. So it looks like we did more of this. Where am I at here? Okay. Okay. Removed that. Spatial awareness, system profile, remove the data providers with the base one. Remove the spatial observer configuration. These are our configuration extensions. I'm going to go ahead and resolve this because I know we had, go ahead and refresh this too, since we did do a bunch of work just recently and pushed up. So let's just go ahead and go all the way back down the bottom. Let's see here. We also updated the drawer. I think I went a little too far here. So mixed reality camera profile inspector. Networking one. I think we did the same thing where we just, yep. Go. All right, so here's where more of the magic happens in this mixed reality service profile inspector. So what we did is we made sure it's a custom editor of this, and this is how you do the generic ones. You actually don't put anything in here, you just add the brackets. Base mixed reality service profile. This will render all of the ones that will have the service constraint list. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at this in the inspector real quick. I'm sorry, in the inspector, in Visual Studio. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. All right. All right, so this renders all of the configurations that will have the service constraint with that dropdown. So what we do is on enable, we get our serialized object, we find our property for our configurations. And this is the name of that. So if we were to rename it, it should update itself smartly. So if we actually rename the field here in the implemented class itself, hopefully we would also rename this. And as long as it keeps the same name, then you'll get the same property that comes out of it. ReSharper is pretty smart about finding links to this, but not always. So this is definitely one place that's a little bit tricky when you're working with inspectors. We also added a protected type called the service constraint, and this is essentially the generic type that this gets. It's this T service. So that's going to be what the service constraint here is. So this is what you'll see in that dropdown. So we go to spatial awareness. In the dropdown, we only get our spatial observers. Let's see here. And this is where the reorderable list, this is where a lot of where we consolidated a lot of the code for rendering this list went to producing this list. I would later love to make it so that I can have the fold out, but I think that's kind of hard to do at the moment, so I'm not going to really try doing that at the moment. I do want to just try and get this first implementation working and coming back. We do have a lot of duplicated code, as you can see here. I would love to maybe refactor this a little bit more, but if it's in the same class, I'm not as worried. And then also it's kind of annoying with Unity anyways, because you have to somehow decompose this serialized object somehow. So I'm not too worried. That's where all the magic happens now for our new list. It definitely looks a lot cleaner, a lot nicer than what it was before. So I'm thankful that I finally was able to get that working. Uh-oh, I did not want to do live share. Cancel. Let's turn this off. Okay. Did not mean to press that. I wish I could remove it. Not worried about that right now. All right, so, all right. And then also our type reference property drawer. Essentially what I did was I just kind of cleaned this class up a little bit more. I added some more link expressions because, again, it's an editor class, so I'm not too worried. The biggest change I did here was I made it a lot easier to set a filter constraint override. I was having a lot of troubles trying to figure out how exactly I was going to implement this. And what was great was there was already this other like property, the excluded type collection getter, that I had known about it, and I had kind of forgotten about it. But essentially, what it is it's a way to, inside of your inspector, before you call the property field for your type reference, you can actually set an excluded type collection that you don't want to show up in the list. Well, I want to do kind of the opposite. I wanted to have just provide the list of types to show in the inspector. So essentially, I wrote the opposite. And this is the filter constraint override. So even though there's an implement attribute, this will override anything that was on that attribute to begin with. And I'll kind of show how that works a little bit as well. Let me actually go ahead and open up this class. I want to say it's type reference property drawer. Here we go. So we have the type filtering. So what this did before is, if you had your class reference property drawer, and this is a static property here. So this will get reset before we draw the next property. So if you were to add this on the next line after, and you had more property fields, you would have to essentially reset it every time. And then in that last class that we were just looking at, in the base mixed reality service profile, no, it's I want to look at the editor for this one. Essentially, we do the same thing here. If we get we get the service constraint, and then if the service constraint is we set this service constraint. I forget exactly how we're using this actually. Here we go. Is constraint satisfied? So what this does is, this is a generic. So this is actually setting a. This did not look the same. So this is actually another static. So this is using a function essentially. So this returns, or I'm sorry, this sets the collection. So you define a function that will return a collection of types to exclude, and what this does is it has a function that returns a Boolean, and then the type that you want to essentially say is it constraint is satisfied. So it's a true or false type thing, and if it's true, then it will do it. If it isn't true, then it won't. So essentially what we did here was we rewrote what was already in the implements attribute. Here. So is constraint satisfied? This is essentially the same thing, except that this gets called inside the property drawer, where we filter all the types out. So what we did was we added the filter constraint override with the type. So we pass in the type and invoke that on the method here. So then this gets invoked and we return whether it is satisfied or not. And here we just use the service constraint that we essentially got on enable. So in on enable, what we do is we get this profile's type, we get the base type, and any generic type arguments that are associated with that. So if we go back to the base mixed reality service profile, it's essentially getting this interface type that we've already defined by writing it in, essentially. This is a little bit slow, but it was the only way I could think of to doing it in a way that made sense. And we only do it on enable, so there may be a little bit of a hang when you select a profile, but I think at the end of the day, it really helps. Oh, hey, Dino, I just didn't see your comments until right now. So he's saying, hi there, I'm not able to get input actions fired in the editor using the keyboard. Here's what I did. I defined an input action, move right, Unity generic mapping profile, input action. Okay. We'll come back to that. I want to try and get these configuration things kind of figured out first, and then I'll try and come back to how to implement input later. That is an important thing for me. I want to do, believe me. I think for now, I think that I want to try and kind of get what I'm working on finished, and then we'll do that for our next live stream. And maybe you and I both can get on a chat channel, and we can do it together so that everybody can kind of talk, and we can kind of talk it out together. All right, so that's essentially the changes I made to the type reference property drawer. Clean this up quite a bit. This was, I don't know, it could go either way. I mean, it's about the same number of lines, but I feel like this was a little bit easier to understand with the link expression. And because we're only doing it in the editor, I don't mind using link again. I try and keep that out of the runtime as much as possible, but for editor stuff, I think it makes it a lot cleaner, a lot easier to read, and performance necessarily isn't that big of a deal. Let's see, most of this is just cleaning up things a little bit, and then some minor optimizations with the string references, where we just use a const instead. And this is where we also clean this up to be just the one line using link. Let's see here. All that looks good. Okay, so then now we have this I-based mixed reality configuration. So this is just this is for base mixed reality service configurations for services that don't have configuration profiles or names. So this is interesting. I think that we do have some of these. I might have to go back and look at this a little bit more, but this does kind of concern me a little bit. I think really, at the end of the day, instance type and priority are really the two important ones. But I believe that all of the services should have names, unless the names are automatically created for them. So we'll take a look at that maybe a little later on. I believe that all services should have a name. So yeah, let's just take a look at this. I think this is something that I thought about. I believe that they should have names. So let's just take a look at where we're using this at. So this is mainly in our base mixed reality service profile. And then we also implement this from, I might just, well, we also have the runtime platform. I believe they would all have runtime platforms as well. Configuration profiles are optional. All right, well, where else are we using this at? Yeah, I'm not sure we need this. I might actually pull this out and put this directly into here. I may also reorder these. Yeah, I'm not fully convinced we need those to be separate types. So I'm actually going to clean this up a little bit more. And then I'm going to go ahead and just remove this class. All right, then we'll switch back over to Unity, make sure it compiles. And this is why you should review your own pull requests, guys. I do this all the time. I'll go back, I'll open a pull request, and I'll do a review just on myself as though it's not me. It's kind of like when you play chess against yourself. I've always enjoyed doing that too, because you never lose. All right, cool. So it seems as though I really didn't need to do that. So I'll go ahead and commit this here in just a moment after I just double check to make sure it is working as expected. I think it is. All right, so we'll go ahead and stage these changes. All right, so removed the base mixed reality service configuration. Yeah, we didn't need that. I'm not sure why I pulled that out. I feel like I had a reason, and I honestly can't remember what it is at the moment. So if you can't remember it, you can always go back and do it again later. So it's really not that big of a deal. Should be okay. Alrighty. So we've removed another class. So we've removed 2 classes so far going through this review, which is great. Let's see here. I'm just going to go ahead and keep going. I'm not going to refresh this. This is where we added that, so I'm not really too worried. Base mixed reality extension service. We just changed everything to make sure that it implements the mixed reality service provider profile. And then in the base service, it looks like we just cleaned some stuff up. All right, so there's a lot of optimizations that happen in the mixed reality toolkit class itself as well. And I'll go through those. This is quite a bit of important changes to the service locator class that I do want to go over. That will be quite important for a lot of people. This is where I wanted a lot of the optimizations to come in. That, you know, this is where I did a lot of refactoring to make it essentially just one line, which is amazing. So what we did, whenever we register a new service, we look for the type, but then for all of the registered service providers for each service. So it goes, you have the main mixed reality toolkit service provider or service locator, and that is what defines your whole application. And then underneath that, you have a lot of these services, platform agnostic services that get registered in. And these platform agnostic services have their own platform specific data providers, which are then registered and then implemented and ran within the runtime. So what we did was we refactored this so we wouldn't have to do a bunch of these for each loops now. So now we don't have custom logic for each one of these specific data providers. So now we've rolled all of this up into one method call, which then goes and does the for each loop. So a lot of these are just using the same code paths, which then reduces the complexity and the number of code paths that are being used. So if we have a bug, it would be a bug in all of them, but because we're using the same code path, then it resolves in all of them as well. So that's important. So that's one of the bigger changes here. And you can see here that when we pulled this out, we also made sure, so what we're doing now is we're actually taking the configurations array that we have, and then we go through each one and we try and load them this way and create and register the service. And then also we added one more way to create and register services using a single configuration as well, which is great because that also helps reduce the complexity. And that by itself reduced quite a bit of the code that we had here that was duplicated over and over and over again that we had to write. So that was a great one. We also updated some of the terminology in our documentation, so that's good. And then the last class here where we validate the configurations, I believe I just updated this. We were kind of doing something similar already. Simon had written something for that. And all it does is it goes through and validates the configurations, make sure they're running properly. Let's see. And this is essentially if we're missing something at runtime. If there's a type that wasn't imported or a type that isn't available because we've switched the build target to something else, this would show up or tell us, hey, you know, this isn't available right now. So it just kind of validates the configurations that we're registering. So that's pretty much all the changes within the service configuration that we've added here. And this is the first step to doing the platform specific stuff that we want to do. So looks like our build validation is still in progress. I'm just going to check that out real quick, see how far along we are. I think I just pushed something, so it could be a while. I'm going to come back to this and take a break and maybe get something to drink and come back later. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'll be back, and maybe next time we'll after, if Dino and Simon gets around to reviewing this and maybe even viewing this as part of their review, that would be cool too. And understanding the changes I made here, that would be great. But I'm ready when you guys are on this pull request. Take care.